Welcome from my side. I'm happy to see at least some of you making your way here despite the weather. My name is Larissa Legewie. I work in technical marketing for Sederma GmbH. If you haven't heard of us, we have about 160 active ingredients in our portfolio, most of them for the skin, but some for the hair as well. One which I would like to present today is FEMINAGE, which is an agent we developed specially for women, particularly for menopausal women. Simply because skin has certain needs at that age, what we can do against it, and I would like to try to go into a bit of detail here, what we do about it. First of all, that it's important to develop an active ingredient for women of that age in the first place. You can see it in the pyramid on the upper right on the slide. We have about 1 billion women over 50. And in order to understand their needs, we conducted a global consumer study 2017 together with Consumer Now. This was headed by Mathieu Foulimel. And we conducted IDIs, deep interviews with 42 women between 45 and 60 years of age. 20% of whom were perimenopausal and 80% had reached menopause. That study was conducted in 4 regions, as you can see in the image: Brazil, the US, France, and South Korea. And the main finding that we had was that menopause is described as a challenge, that women are calling into question their feminine role, their ideal, because a lot is changing for them in this phase. They can no longer have children, sexual desires change. And in this phase, their outer appearance is of particular importance to those women, simply to keep their self-confidence and to continue to be satisfied with themselves. And so we try to find out how we can support them. So one problem that many of them described, which they notice in this phase, is that their skin is starting to sag. Not just the cheekbones, the jowls, and the neck, but also the chest and basically everywhere on the body. Sometimes it's also connected with drooping eyelids. We've all seen that. And what you can see on the left is a few statements by respondents whom we asked. One says, for example, it's this "you look terrible" effect. You look like somebody who's pouting. Some feel they look more masculine. They actually use less makeup because of that. And what many women want in this phase is to highlight their femininity. And what they're expecting from products is that they're actually tailored to them. Products they can enjoy, they like to use. Products developed specially for them in this phase of their lives. So we looked into publications. What's the process behind all this? What we see a lot is that menopausal women are more prone to glycation and oxidative stress. This very simply is down to the loss of hormones, the depletion of estrogen levels, which is a strong antioxidant and also has a positive effect on glucose homeostasis. So with estrogen deficiency, there's less of this positive effect, of course. Blood glucose levels are rising, and I already mentioned this process. And sugar is in the blood and in skin proteins, and this triggers the glycation process, which is irreversible, which means that the sugar remnants are attaching, and this forms advanced glycation end products. And these lead to inflammations, to antioxidation, to enzyme inactivation, the denaturated, so enzymes are inactivated. And what we could also observe was a cross-linking of extracellular matrix. So not just collagen, but also others, as you will see in a moment. So these AGEs, these advanced glycation end products, lead to further processes, including elastases, sagging, tissue stiffening, and senescence of the cells. Just very generally summed up as skin damage. So we tried to approach this on 4 levels. First, as you will see in our in vitro studies, then I will talk about the in vivo studies, one at the glycation level, then elastin, which is the first protein we think about when we think about elasticity, of course. And then also at the DEJ level, which also sags with advancing age, and oxidation and inflammation. So first, let's go to the cell level and talk about glycation. So first of all, we had a look at elastin. And what we saw was that compared to the glycated control, elastin glycation was down by 70%. We were also able to show that elastin production after glycating stress was produced actually 8.8 times more elastin. So this was extracellular, but also within the cells, this is where we find vimentin, which is a protein of the cytoskeleton, which provides stability to the cell and also makes it more agile. So this is green fluorescent in the cell, as you can see in the images at the bottom. So if we lose this agility, well, this means that the cell is heading towards senescence, it's dying. And glycation stress can be seen here. This is an agent, MgO. You can see that the cells are contracting. But when you have FEMINAGE, you can see that the cell reaches its full agility. Again, it's vital and protected against glycation. And it's being confirmed by another test that the cells are actually vital with an assay of collagen contraction. And what we saw compared to control, that cells were able to contract 100%. So they are vital, they're alive. And in glycated control, this wasn't the case anymore. Only 60% of the cells were able to contract, not as before. But when we had FEMINAGE in the cell culture, we were able to see that that up to 94% of the cells recovered this ability to contract. So this is a quasi-total protection against glycation achieved by FEMINAGE. So now the elastin level, I already mentioned that I'd like to talk about that. And not just quantity, as is usually the case, we also looked at the quality. So another important point is that we did not work with young fibroblasts, which are easy to handle in a cell culture, but as we were dealing with older respondents, we used fibroblasts from older cultures. And this was very impressive. Cells which are usually not very reactive, in response to a stimulus, compared to the control, there was an increased production by at least 53%. But as I said, it was not just a quantitative but also qualitative analysis. You can see the images here in the middle. This was a very elaborate procedure. The images were analyzed, the fiber length and quantity and network complexity were analyzed, and we were able to observe a clear improvement at all levels. We also didn't just look at the elastin, but also at fibrillin 5 and MFAP4, together with elastin or tropoelastin, And these form the mature elastic fiber together. So we were able to assume to really have stable, functional, mature fibers. A nice little add-on was that we looked at elastases inhibition, and we saw that even with 1% of FEMINAGE, this inhibition was significant at least 44%. Then we looked at the dermal-epidermal junction, the DEJ, which usually flattens with age. And we checked whether FEMINAGE enabled us to have these individual components like collagen 4, laminin 5, and collagen 7. And we saw regulation upwards as well in this case. So we can safely assume that the weakening, this age-related flattening of DEJ can be counteracted by FEMINAGE. The last in vitro results I'd like to show you is oxidation and inflammation to see whether we see some effects here. So first, the antioxidative effects. We can see that the cells for oxidative stress for instance, the ROS for HDO stress minus 91% could be, so it could be reduced by 91% compared to the control. Or lipid peroxidation in UVE stress situations was significantly reduced compared to the control. Then we looked at inflammation processes, like typical markers that we look at is PGE2, interleucin 8, and interleucin 6. So we saw when UVB stress is added, or UV exposure, UVB, or MGO, when that was added in, there was again a significant difference, a significant reduction compared to the control. And the only value where it wasn't significant as first was this one with the fibroblasts. We only used 1% of FEMINAGE, but when we increased that to 3%, we also achieved a significant difference in that case. So we can safely say that FEMINAGE has an antioxidative and anti-inflammatory effect. Now the in vivo results, which interest most people, it's always interesting to see whether these results actually translate into reality. So we conducted 2 in vivo studies, one with a Caucasian panel in France with 38 respondents, 20 applied the FEMINAGE product and 18 the placebo. And then we conducted another study in China with a partner. So the first study was conducted by us in our labs, and the other with a partner in China. In China, we had 52 respondents, 26 of whom received FEMINAGE and 26 applied the placebo. It was applied twice daily, 3% FEMINAGE for 2 months. What we evaluated in the first study was facial contour sagging, upper eyelid sagging, as we mentioned, crow's feet wrinkles, using a Fringer projection, so 3D structural analysis. Then we also looked at elasticity using the elastimeter and the cutometer. In both studies, we also had expert assessments. And in the last study, in the first study, we also had self-evaluations. What I forgot to mention, you can see the Fringer projection on the right. This was what the respondent can place, and this is a 3D structural image that we receive from that. So the results were divided into different topics. So one was facial contour remodeling. So first of all, we looked at contour sagging. Again, this was done with the Fringer projection. So this analyzes a line which you can imagine going across the face, and the deeper it goes, the longer this line is. So So what we want to achieve is a shorter line because this means fewer wrinkles. What we could find here, we saw an improvement by minus 10%, and we had 71% of volunteers responding. Jowl volume was also projected using relief projection, and what we found here was an improvement by 11.4% and 69% responding volunteers. It's also nice that the experts saw the effect in their assessment. They evaluated a significant improvement for 34% of the volunteers. In the Chinese panel, we also looked at marionette lines. And we also saw a significant improvement of a maximum of minus 36% for 65% of the volunteers. And I think the images make this very clear how this improves in the end. I think it's very clear to see, particularly the cheek area and here the shortening of the marionette line. Then we also looked at the upper eyelid and the drooping upper eyelid, again using the finger projection. And we looked at the maximum height, the volume, and surface. So for 100% of the volunteers, we achieved significant results. And the expert assessment was also great. They saw for 51% of the volunteers, they saw an improvement. What was even nicer was the self-evaluation of the volunteers, because 80% of the volunteers themselves were able to see that they looked less tired and the upper eyelid wasn't drooping as much as it used to. Then we looked at crow's feet wrinkles at the relief and the maximum depth. And again, we saw a significant improvement for 100% of the volunteers. The expert judges had a similar view of things, and they attested a significant improvement for 63% of our volunteers. Now next, skin elasticity and firmness. This was done with the end-volume cutimeter. So by suction, seeing how much the skin expands, which is a benchmark for skin firmness, and how fast it snaps back into place is elasticity. And we saw an improvement in this case for by 8.2% compared to placebo in 72% of the volunteers. Again, you can see the improvement in the image here. Regarding elasticity, we used the cutimeter, and we saw an improvement for 85% of the volunteers, and in resilience as well. The expert judges saw this effect too and evaluated it firmer by 10%, and one respondent had a very, very good result with a maximum of 100% improvement, and they saw an improvement in 46% of the volunteers. So I'm sure you've been asking yourself, what is this active ingredient? It is an extract from the leaves of Engelhardia Chrysolepis. And the active molecule is astilbene, which is a glycosyl flavonoid. It's rather in the astilbene and its derivatives. You can see the structure of the molecule on the right. And it's also China conform. So there's very nice inky here. We have data on naturality, 20.2% natural content, and the extract, of course, is 100% of natural origin. And that is why it's COSMA certified, of course. So this is a little bit of background information on the botanic. So Engelhardia is a subtropical tree which grows in Asia, and it's part of the Junglandaceae species of trees. The phytochemical substances which are interesting is most of all astilbin and its derivatives, because they also have wound healing properties and repairing effects. So in China, this plant has been traditionally used for treating sword cuts and skin inflammations and other inflammatory diseases. It's also used traditionally in Asia for hundreds of years in traditional medicine. And you may have heard of it. It's koki tea. It's used in koki tea, which is a kind of sweet tea which is said to have beneficial effects on general health and well-being. So much for the active ingredient based on the science and the background information. But another thing that's always becoming more center stage is sustainability. So our actives are always included in our CSR concept. So be actively committed for people, for business, and the planet. Positive effects of FEMINAGE are mainly in procurement. So the sourcing, fair trade, traceability, and ultimately the corresponding certificates. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that we don't respect human rights. We promote local development, we make sure that there's occupational safety. There is a lot of benefits on that side. And for the planet, the environment, and sustainability, it is a very sustainable process. Produced in a low temperature procedure, cytotoxicology, it is very easily degradable. So now for our CSA strategy, we're using this for all our actives. We're making sure that it's good for the planet, that it's included in our concepts, and we're highlighting the advantages. So if you're interested in an active ingredient, we can always give you all the nice aspects which you can use in your marketing efforts. So this brings us to the summary. Now again on a scientific level. What is FEMINAGE? It was specially designed to help answer the needs of women experiencing skin sagging related to estrogenic decline. It's ecologically designed, 100% natural origin. And at the cell level, we were able to show that it mainly targets elastic tissue. We measured the quantity and the quality. Then we see that it protects against glycation and glycostress. Then we looked at the DEJ, which is also very important. Because it builds a bridge to elastin. And again, we see the components which build it. And we were able to show that it has an antioxidative and anti-inflammatory effect. And we were also able to prove this in our in vivo studies where the product was tested for 2 months. As you've seen, and we have great results on skin elasticity, firmness, jowl sagging, droopy eyelids, crow's feet wrinkles, and marionette lines. And I hope I was able to convince you of our product of FEMINAGE. We are all very convinced of it. We'll be happy to see you at our booth. We also launched another active for eye rings just last month. If you want to come see us, we're happy. We're in Hall 2 at booth D11. And I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.